Welcome to the Cities of Migration Learning Exchange. Today's webinar explores the topic Empowering Youth, Identity, Belonging, and Migration. Muslim youth, refugee youth, migrant youth. When identity politics follow you to school, onto the playing field, and into the street, maybe it's time to go beyond stereotypes and challenge the public imagination. Today, we'll learn how youth initiatives in Berlin and London are doing just that, how they're using theater and sport to promote connection and skill development while creating a compelling counter-narrative about identity and belonging, and empowering youth to play an active role in reshaping our cultural norms. I'm delighted to welcome today's guests who join us virtually from Berlin and London. From Berlin, Germany, we have Séverine Lenglet, European Media and Communications Officer with Citizens for Europe. And from London, UK, we're joined by Emily Mason, Senior Project Manager, and her colleague Amina Amr, Project Coordinator, both with Maslaha. So let's start by traveling to Berlin. Let me introduce our first speaker. Séverine Lenglet is the European Project Coordinator as well as Media and Communication Officer at Citizens for Europe, a Berlin-based NGO that promotes the development of a participatory and inclusive European Union. Between 2015 and 2017, Séverine coordinated at the local level the two-year European-wide NICER project that aimed at empowering refugee youth through the performing arts and fostering a welcoming culture through intercultural learning. So it's my pleasure to welcome you, Séverine. The podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Kim, for this great opportunity to be here with all of you today. And I'm very pleased to share with you the learning experience of the Project NICER. As you say, the main aim was to empower refugee and local youth through performing arts workshops. So first, I will give you a few key facts about the project. It was funded by the European Commission and was the result of a collaboration between 7 partner cities across Europe. In each partner city, 15 young refugees and 15 local young people created within 4 months a musical on the notion of identity. They performed the musical in June 2017 in front of about 600 people. So in my presentation today, I will mostly focus on the project in Berlin, but many of the ideas, methods, and tips I will share with you have also been replicated in the other cities of the project. So, which needs does this project answer? Germany received in 2015 about 500,000 new asylum applications. It's about a third from children, and refugees are mostly accommodated in reception facilities. There, the opportunities for interaction and exchange with locals are very limited, and very often language and cultural barriers can be a major obstacle. On the other hand, Europe is facing a rise of right-wing populism, of racism, and a generalized anti-migration sentiment. So this situation creates the need to identify and implement innovative instruments to counterbalance this challenge. And we believe that theater is a powerful tool to achieve this. Because artistic projects help overcome language barriers, overcome discrimination and prejudices, they foster intercultural dialogue, team building, and collaborative work. How was this project implemented? The trainings on the performance were implemented by the Theater X. It's a local community theater that combines artistic work with political education. And the young people were recruited in the neighborhood of the theater and in the welcome classes for young refugees. The team running the project was composed by 2 vocal and music coaches, 2 dramaturgy creative writing coaches, 2 theater director and drama teachers, a language coach, and also a social worker, and they all promoted cohesion and the empowerment of every participant. During 4 months, this team of the Theater X organized outside of the school hours, each week 2-3 hours drama theater workshop, as well as 2-3 hours orchestra musical workshop. And there were also dramaturgy workshops every second Saturday. These workshops, dramaturgy workshops, always started with a collective breakfast, because the idea was to bring the young people together in a more informal setting and to create a relaxed atmosphere. And after this breakfast, they used participative methods to stimulate group discussion on identity, migration, and right-wing ideologies. So the entire process took place in German language, and the language barriers were balanced by group members who always offer translation. All these workshops were open to all the participants according to their interests and needs, and only the last month the young participants were asked to clearly commit their final role at the play. Let's say such a process might sound less serious or risky or complicated, but this flexibility is a more inclusive way for young people, and especially for young newcomers, as for example they are not sure if they are going to still be there in the city 5 months after the beginning of the project. On top of all these activities, there were also 2 hours per week of interactive and cross-cultural language training. This training was different from the traditional frontal teaching approach that we know from a school setting. It's not only the refugees who were taking part in it, but also the young locals. And the language coach's role was mainly to assist them in their interaction. For this, he used innovative methods such as role-playing, language choir, storytelling, and song. And the whole group was working on their voice, their pronunciation, and learning new vocabulary at the same time. The Theater X approach is very participative, so it means that the young participants take complete ownership of the project and are encouraged to take responsibility in all the aspects of the production of the play. So the professional coaches, they are mostly there to support and guide them in creating the musical, in getting skill, such as acting, dancing, creative writing, sound and light technique. But the young people choose their own role. If they want to be part of the director crew, of the crew writing the play, if they want to be a musician, to create the costume or be active backstage. And together they decide, they develop, and they write the dramaturgy of the final play. So it's very different from a traditional theater, because it's not the drama teacher or the theater director telling them what to play and how to play. This is a co-design, a co-creation. And a nice sentence is the main instrument of the drama teacher is mostly the question, not the answer, to understand this concept. So, how did the participants benefit from this project? Through the workshop, they develop, of course, their creative skills, acting, dancing, singing, but they also develop their self-esteem and socialization as they created new friendships. And many of them told us in their feedback that they found a place where they feel at home. So it's a great achievement for us. The theater became a safe space for many of them, where they are not only learning theater, but where they feel understood, empowered, protected, and helped. In this theater, or there in this space, they are able to talk about their stories, about their everyday life challenges as young people, and also, for many of them, about their experience with discrimination and racism, for example. The theater coaches are a bit like their big brother and sisters, in a way. So a real achievement for the newcomers of this project was also to be able to perform on stage in German, in the German language. After only 4 months workshop, all actors knew their text and could speak it out loud and clear in German language. So this was very impressive, since the play language was really not simplified for their benefit, and the whole group committed to tackle complex issues, as we said before, identity, migration, right-wing ideologies, and actually it was in this sense a challenge and achievement for the whole group. So moreover, and thanks to the collective reflection and discussion on identity, on people, on the impact of language, all the participants developed a culture of criticism and dialogue. Their awareness and new knowledge on these topics had a multiplier effect in their networks, because they shared their insight with their family, with their communities, with their friends, or at school. And the production process can thus be also regarded as political and civic education. For the young locals, for example, the project created awareness about the life of refugees and their difficulties. And some of them told us they felt overwhelmed from the refugee stories as they realized their own privileges and chance, and they become quickly allies for their non-local peers. Last but not least, one big success of this project for us is that today most of the young people taking part in this project, they continue to go to the community theater and to take part in new activities and new play in this theater. What was the impact for the local community? The audience of the final performance counted about 600 persons. We got the feedback that the play mostly broadened their reflection on what it means to be a refugee and also on the dangers of right-wing discourses. Moreover, a part of the group played in front of pupils from 2 classrooms, about 60, 70 children, and then they discussed and analyzed some parts of the play, how the political discourse is constructed. They exchange about racism and discrimination in their everyday life, and some of the young people in these schools told us they had never heard or talked about these topics before. At last, I would like to share with you what I believe to be tips for replication. The first one is to be very flexible, as I mentioned earlier. Then to build a trustful relationship. I give you an example. The European Commission that financed this project wanted young refugees with asylum status. So during the recruitment process, we should have asked them for a proof of their status. We refused to ask for the refugees' ID documents because we believe we should be careful not to replicate what the police and administration are doing. And this can create a lot of stress for the refugees and could remind them of traumatic experiences. So the newcomers should be treated as equal with the young local, and we would have never thought about asking the other young people to show us their ID, for example, because the objective was to have an inclusive participation instead of a participation based on the legal status. On top of that, another tip, we believe that it has an empowering effect when members of the staff also have a migration background. And our last tip, we think it's important not to take a neo-colonial and paternalistic perspective, which means avoiding top-down methods, work with the youth to build on their interests, support them when they need help, but give them leadership in the project. This is how young people will take complete ownership of the project and will feel empowered. Thanks for listening so far, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
And thank you, Séverine, for showing us, for an excellent presentation and for showing us how that power of storytelling can engage refugee and non-refugee youth in an exploration of identity and belonging, whatever your background. I think your focus on the point you've made, that your focus was on the question and not the answer, is perhaps that really is one of the secrets to how we're all going to build a more open and inclusive societies. Your audiences in Berlin were very lucky to have been treated to these performances. I wish we could see them here. So now we're going to move from Berlin to London, where another innovating youth initiative is capturing the public imagination in a profound way. In London, Muslim Girls Fence was created by the Maslaha Project to break down stereotypes about the art of fencing as an exclusively male and white-dominated elite sport, not accessible to most people, and certainly not to girls. So let me introduce our next speaker to tell us all about it. We have Emily Mason, who is Senior Project Manager and Project Lead with Muslim Girls Fence at Maslaha. And Maslaha is a London-based organization that provides culturally sensitive and practical information about Islam. Before joining the Maslaha team, Emily worked as a historian with a specific interest in civil society and grassroots activism in 1930s Britain. She's been a visiting researcher at the London School of Economics, European Institute, has taught modern British history at King's College, London, and lectured in modern European history at the University of East London. Emily has an undergraduate degree in drama from the University of Bristol and a particular interest in the power of art forms to mobilize communities, challenge conventional wisdom, and create social and political change. With Emily, we're joined by Amina Amer, who is project coordinator at Maslaha, developing and delivering workshops in schools and communities as part of the Muslim Girls Fence team. Her own research focuses on the effects of the racialization of Islam on the construction, negotiation, and performance of identities among ethnically white Muslims in the UK. More generally, her research interests include identity, religion, agency, power, and societal change, with a particular focus on religious and ethnic identities. So welcome both to Emily and Amina. The podium is yours.
Oh, hi, thank you. This is Emily here. So yeah, Amina and I both work for the charity Maslaha, which tackles social issues facing Muslim communities, and the charity works across health, gender, education, and the criminal justice system. And we're going to talk to you about a program that we do called Muslim Girls Fence, which really kind of straddles our gender and education work. It's a combined project between Maslaha and British Fencing, and the aim of the project is to challenge misconceptions of and raise aspirations among young Muslim women in the UK through fencing and creativity. And just to sort of give you an idea of where this project came from, it comes out of the work that Maslaha have done previously around Islam and feminism, part of a broader project called I Can Be She, and it was rooted in a desire to kind of tackle this double discrimination that Muslim women face on the basis of faith and gender. Muslim Girls Fence is a program which works across 3 levels, and I'll tell you a bit more about those levels later on, but just to give a kind of brief outline, we work always across kind of grassroots level, policy level, and a public imagination level. So for this program, in terms of our grassroots work, we go into schools and communities, and we run 10 weeks of creative workshops exploring themes around identity and self-expression and challenging stereotypes, and we couple this with fencing sessions. The girls that work with us can then, and the women that work with us can then go on to be ambassadors for the project, and that's something that maybe I'm not going to talk too much about in the presentation today, but it's something that we could pick up on in the Q&A. At a policy level, we've got in this case, it's kind of two ways of looking at this really. We, on the one hand, we look to impact school culture, so that teachers and peers also understand the issues around identity, the identity that Muslim pupils might face. And we've also looked to impact policy at a government level. So, for example, we've spoken on the Women and Inequalities Select Committee, giving evidence around Muslim girls and education. And then finally, the public imagination level, which with our media work, which I'll go on to talk about in a minute. So why do we do creativity in fencing? Why do we do these identity workshops and the fencing workshops? Well, I think the important part of the creative workshops is that this isn't simply a sports initiative. Yes, it's great if we get more young Muslim women doing sport and more young women generally doing sport and feeling like it's something for them. But this is about something much bigger. It's about exploring identity, challenging gender stereotypes, and doing that through creativity. Why fencing? Well, fencing is a highly skilled, tactical, creative, and strategic sport, and therefore really helps with confidence building. And it's also a white, male-dominated elitist sport, or at least it's perceived to be. So partly through the project, we're challenging that idea as well. We've worked with, already in schools, we've kind of reached about 400 pupils. We've had incredibly positive feedback from teachers and pupils, teachers reporting better relationships with their pupils, greater understanding of the issues facing some of these pupils, and improved engagement from the pupils. And the pupils who've been involved reported increased confidence. Again, similar things really, better engagement. They're taking part in more other school activities, and that they really appreciate having a space to have these conversations that we have in our creative workshops. And I think really in a sort of increased pride in who they are. The other kind of area where, if we're looking at the outcomes of the project, is in our creative output. And that relates to what I touched upon previously, our public imagination work, where we're really looking to challenge dominant narratives in wider societies and as I said, challenge some of these negative stereotypes that Muslim women may face. And we do that at Maslaha through doing our own creative projects. So the workshops are in themselves creative, but we also produce creative content. And you can access, I think in the post-webinar archive, we've got a film that we recently made at the YouTube studio, which I really encourage everybody to check out. And you can find the link for that. That's coming up on the screen, and you can find that in the archive. So that film was shown at the Science Museum in London and also at the Southbank Centre, which are both kind of major cultural institutions here in the UK. I've got the picture that's up here at the moment around some of our public imagination work. This is Amina here at the Science Museum doing the workshops, a taster, if you like, of the workshops that we do with the girls we work with, doing that with members of the public so that they engage with some of these issues and some of these questions. And people really, we have some really interesting conversations in these public workshops, and these are awkward conversations sometimes that people don't normally have. And we couple that again at the Science Museum. Here we are doing fencing. So the members of the public had a go at the creative workshops and they had a go at the fencing. So then they kind of are also immersed in the project and immersed in those conversations. And we also recently, as I said, at the Women of the World Festival at the Southbank Centre. And the good thing about the outreach of these projects is at the Science Museum, or the Late, which is the event that we were at, you tend to get around 4,000 to 5,000 people at these events. And similarly, at Women of the World, it's again thousands of people, and that's a festival that has an international profile. And finally, within our public imagination outreach, I think it's important just to mention the media coverage. So we do this creative work to impart, get major media coverage so that, again, these conversations are brought into the mainstream and we can challenge some of these simplistic narratives that are happening at the moment and divisive narratives in the UK. So we've been covered in a range of media, from Al Jazeera to the Telegraph to BuzzFeed, and most recently here we are filming for an episode of Blue Peter, which I don't know if, unless you're from the UK, you might not be familiar with it, but it's the BBC's longest running children's programme, and it's incredibly popular with hundreds of thousands of viewers. So I'm going to pass over to Amina now, who's going to explain a little bit about the context of the workshops.
Hi, thanks, Emily. So just kind of to give you a bit of information about the context in which we work in, especially for those who don't necessarily aren't familiar with the context of the UK. And it's important to obviously understand the project that we're working with and we're taking part in within the sort of context. So just to give you a few stats on the number of Muslims in the UK, Islam is actually the second largest religion in the UK. About 4.4% of the population are actually Muslim or identify as Muslim. The majority of those people actually live in England, and 40% of England's Muslims actually live in London. So thinking about some of the context in which we work, the majority of the schools we've worked in have been in both London and in Birmingham. So we're clearly working in spaces where there are quite there's quite a large Muslim population, but we'll go into talking about where we see this project going further and how we're not necessarily sticking to those sorts of areas as well. And a few more stats, there's 22% of Muslims actually live in Birmingham as well, so they've got like two of some of the largest populations of Muslims in English cities in England. So just thinking about sort of representations of Muslims more widely, of course in the British context, but elsewhere, of course, which wouldn't come as no surprise to many of you, I'm sure, that Muslims are often perceived as a threat, or depicted as a threat to society, a threat to security, to Western and European culture. There's a lot of connections with terrorism and extremism. And as a result, they then become sort of marginalized, ostracized, and othered as a community. And many Muslims and Muslim communities have said they've really felt that, especially more recently as well. And when thinking about, because of course we work, the project's called Muslim Girls Fence, so we focus on stereotypes around Muslim women. When you think about how they're often depicted, they're often seen as oppressed, submissive, have little control or power over their own lives. And so this project tries to create a space in which these misrepresentations and these stereotypes can be sort of, and the experiences as a result can be shared, discussed, and then challenged collectively. So our work sort of focuses around two main themes, that of confidence, building confidence, and that's the issue of solidarity. So if we take the issue of solidarity, our workshops try to bring girls from different backgrounds. So we don't just work with young Muslim girls, we work with all girls from all sorts of different backgrounds to sort of discuss these issues around stereotyping, around issues around identity and belonging, and draw parallels between their experiences and their different experiences, and to sort of recognize the intersections of other forms of inequalities that they may face as young women. And the whole idea is around working together to challenge and overcome them. And that feeds in quite well into the confidence theme, where through collaborative discussions and empathy and through creative work and expression, as well as through fencing, of course, they build the confidence of these girls to challenge and break down the stereotypes that exist. But there is something really important that we need to emphasize, and that's not to undermine any of the everyday ways in which these young girls challenge these stereotypes and challenge these misconceptions in perhaps more subtle ways. And that this project, Muslim Girls Fence, is just another medium, another way in which they can do this. And to some extent it might have a wider impact. And here's a photo here from one of our one of the groups of girls that we've worked with in one of the schools, and a lot of the feedback we've had is incredibly positive. The girls have really appreciated the opportunity to sort of discuss the issues of stereotyping and misrepresentation, to share their experiences, and many of them have said that one of the big takeaways for them has also been the idea of friendship. So they've made friends with girls in other classes who they might not have interacted with had it not been for this project. And teachers have also had quite a positive impact as well. Have shared that it's had a positive impact, and that they've seen a different, because we try to encourage the teachers to sit in on the workshops, and having the opportunity to sort of hear them share these stories. They've often said that they've seen a different side to these students, and they've developed a better understanding of their experiences through being present at the workshops and hearing what they have to say. Cool. So just in terms of the expansion of the project and lessons learned, I'm going to hand it over to Emily again.
Hi, thanks, Amina. So this is something that we've been running since 2015 in schools in London and Birmingham, and we're now expanding. We've got funding from, the project is partly funded by Comic Relief, and we've now got funding from google.org to expand it across 5 UK cities. So between now and next summer, we'll have worked in London, Birmingham, in Doncaster, Bradford, and in Glasgow. And what we're doing is we're continuing to work with schools, but within the kind of localities of where the schools are based, we're now developing community projects, and that they are intergenerational projects working with women from anything from sort of 16 to 60 really, or even older if they wanted to come, and almost taking that idea about confidence building within schools, and we're looking at people having agency within the community and feeling part of their community. And again, it's the same project. It's the fencing and creative workshops, and we've started one of those now in Doncaster, and it's a mixture of both Muslim and non-Muslim women coming together in that space, doing fencing, doing a creative project, and having some of these conversations that we want people to have. And I've got just a quote from one lady from last week who said, one Muslim lady who's been coming to the session, she said, "I have so many responsibilities, tending to my husband, tending to my children. I barely used to have a life beyond that. And the program actually got me to leave the house and do something for myself. I never used to leave the house before." And I think, that's just, that was just that particular woman's experience that again, I think shows that this has had like a really positive impact on her. In terms of the lessons, I think really what Amina and I just wanted to draw out to kind of keep it quite simple is, I think 2 things. If you're working with schools, if you're in any of these types of projects, you've got to, it's quite difficult to work with schools actually. They're having, especially here in the UK and sort of current climate here, there's a lot of pressure on teachers, and they don't necessarily have a huge amount of time for these extracurricular, if you like, projects. And I think we really try to root what we're doing within the curriculum of those schools, and for the project to take place during class time. We really want to involve senior leadership, and that's something that I would really recommend, so that the schools are really invested in the project. And so one way that we've overcome that, which I would sort of recommend to someone if they were going to do something like this, is we go back and work now with the same schools. We're getting a different cohort of girls each year, but we're developing a relationship with the schools so that we can genuinely have an impact on the school culture and on teacher understanding of these issues. And I think in terms of working with communities, and this is key to the way that Maslahar works, is that we work very much in partnership with the people in those communities. So we're based in London, and it's not a case of us just sort of sweeping in with our idea and landing in that community and it's the same in each place. You know, you need to be flexible and find kind of leaders within those communities and listen to them and work with them. And I think be very aware, and I think I'm stating the obvious, but sometimes people can forget this, that, you know, a group of Muslim women in Doncaster is going to be completely different and have completely different needs and wants from a group of Muslim women in Bradford. So it's really, really important that you look at that local context. And finally, in terms of transferable, how sort of you could transfer some of these ideas to any project, I just wanted to highlight this thing that we do around working in terms of the practice, as in the grassroots work, creating systemic change at grassroots level, policy, influencing policy at a strategic level based on our work at the local level, and then public imagination, influencing and shaping public debates and media narratives. And I think they, you know, one example of the way that these are really, really kind of so crucially connected is that, you know, I mentioned earlier that we, as part of our policy work, had spoken to the Women in Inequalities Select Committee, and, you know, that opportunity came to us through the media attention, through our work in public imagination, so that all of these things are really, really interconnected. And finally, I would just say that this is a project that combines a lot of elements. It combines sport, art, gender rights, issues that may face minority communities in terms of how they see themselves and how others see them. And I think that, again, in something looking at the transferable ideas, I think that when you bring together so many of those elements, of course that poses challenges, but it also means that you have got a potential to reach a really, really wide audience and to get your ideas kind of really out there across a range of UK society, so that you're not just talking within a certain echo chamber. So yeah, that would be our advice. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Emily and Amina. What a great project. Muslim Girls Fence really is challenging us all. And both presentations today have shown us about the power of sport and the arts to challenge a public narrative on, more broadly, on migration and identity. And I think this concept of public imagination that you've used and that you've talked about, and which of course is so much part of a theatre project like the Nicer project, is that you know, these ideas like these really are opening up new spaces for the conversations and the connections that we really all need to have around these issues. So thank you both for fantastic presentations. And of course, the good ideas we've heard today are successfully they're encouraging young people to become their own storytellers and to speak for themselves instead of being spoken to and spoken about. And these are brilliant for young people. Both projects have also been replicated or should be replicated in cities across the UK. Their ideas being taken across Europe. I hope our audience have learned as much as we have from both of them, both presentations, and which are ready to be replicated, should be replicated in a city near you. So take note, connect, and let's get started. For now, we've concluded the formal part of today's webinar. It's time for our Q&A and your participation, our audience's participation. So please continue to submit questions to the Q&A box on your screen while I field the first question. Okay, we'll get started now. One of the things that that I've been thinking about listening to you is that, both these projects are addressing the right of young people to grow up in a world where their individuality and personal choices are recognized and valued over the stereotypes and myths that all too frequently confound notions of identity. But with young people in particular, labels can be very dangerous. Why? So perhaps you could elaborate on that idea of why labels are dangerous for young people and indeed for all of us. And perhaps we could open that question up to Séverine.
So why labels are so dangerous?
Yes.
Because labeling is based on a perspective, I think, that is not inclusive. So each individual is a sum of diverse characteristics. So labels are dangerous because they do not see the complexity of an individual. Labels can give the feeling not to be part of a group or of the society and not to be just accepted by the society. So as such, I think labels create isolation and exclusion.
Yes, that's very good, actually. And Amina and would you like to and Emily, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with what Séverine said, and just thinking about our specific context, not only are labels incredibly problematic and narrowing, but, in the case of thinking about labels such as Muslim or Muslim woman, they're very marginalizing, stereotyping, they're racist. There are discriminatory assumptions that come with these labels often. So they don't really necessarily take into account the complexity and the intersectional nature of our identities, how, these individuals or these girls and these women are not just Muslim women. There are many more layers to who they are. And I think all of that is really important to understand and acknowledge and to explore.
Very good, very good. And both projects are using highly sort of innovative, creative approaches to empower young people. And so I wondered, and perhaps we'll start here with Séverine, whether there were any unexpected outcomes in the work. You started with such a principled sort of concept and approach, and you've achieved so much. But I wonder, were there any unexpected outcomes, things that you didn't, that surprised you, or that maybe you would do differently?
So when we started the project, we could not imagine that we would build in such a short period of time such a structure in which the young participant of our project will tell us 1 year later we feel at home. And this was for us a great achievement. So we believe we chose the right partner in Berlin, and we would definitely work together with them again. So because this is for us a great achievement, that young people say after 1 year we feel at home in this place. So it's not only about art, it's about also finding a place where they feel secure, where they feel empowered, where they feel good. Yeah. And what we would do differently, if I may, I would say the terminology of the European project, and even the name of the project, nicer. So we didn't design the first draft of this project. It was a European partnership. It was drafted by the Italian partner. But as we learned that from the play of the young people in Berlin, words can be very powerful in excluded people, as we just said about labels. And so we had passionate discussion with our partner on the risk of using terminology such as integration, welcoming culture also, or even the word refugee. Because here in Germany, for example, the word integration has been very controversial. In many places in Europe, also in France or in Italy, it's often assimilated to assimilation. So a one-way process. Migrants have to integrate, they have to learn the language, to adapt to the culture. They don't see it as a two-way process, integration. That's why we think it's a word that we would prefer to replace with inclusion, for example. Many prefer also the word newcomer instead of the word refugee to avoid labeling or a paternalistic attitude. And also, as I said, the term welcoming culture started to be criticized as it turned the right of people to migrate into charity and generosity in a way, and could create a sentiment that newcomers have to be thankful to be in the country. And we see it as an obstacle, and many activists here see it as an obstacle to complete equality, to full participation, and to co-design the future together.
That's very interesting. So projects like these go well beyond the action on the stage. They're really opening up new partnerships and challenging us to think much more deeply about even the language that we're using. Well, I think that's fantastic. And let's and Emily and Amina, perhaps you'd like to comment. On that, were there unexpected outcomes, something you didn't expect or would do differently?
Yeah, so, sorry, we just had a bit of background noise there. Could you repeat the question?
Just wondering whether there were any, asking you about unexpected outcomes or something that you might do differently.
I think,
go ahead.
Hello? Sorry? Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
No, I think for us, I think really in terms of unexpected outcomes and things we might do differently, it's just the thing of being aware of the evolving nature of the project. And so that was, as I touched on in the presentation, just about your relationships with the people that you're working with within, like whether that's a relationship with a school or a community group, and being very aware of the kind of local context of those groups. And I think that's a key thing. So so I think in terms of doing differently, the way we've approached it is just to see it as a kind of a constantly evolving process.
That's great. And another question I had for you, Emily and Amina, around your work. It's fantastic. It's much more than a cultural mashup. Its advocacy is really leveraging the surprise value of mixing things up. And I guess just a very simple question: why is it important to use surprise to challenge the public imagination?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and certainly I think we've gone for what we would hope would be visually sort of seen as an unusual pairing, and in a sense, through doing that, breaking down labels around Muslim women, and at the same time, diversifying sport and making it more accessible. But I think that it's important, to sort of note that that's a strategic and kind of conscious decision. We went for something that would be very eye-catching, because that, the fact of seeing some of these eye-catching images and seeing fencing and people fencing that you wouldn't normally necessarily associate with the sport, that makes people curious. It makes them want to come over and ask you questions and find out more. And so I think that's really important there. And also I think the strategic side of it, in terms of that fencing, it's not just, we didn't just choose it because it was sort of something that was going to make a difference visually. It's also that it's a strategic and, like I said, a sort of sport that's very skilled and strategic. And so in a sense, the sport lends itself to confidence building, I would say. And that's something that also kind of influenced our decision to combine these things.
Oh, that's great. But it's wonderful. So your work is really empowering young people to create their own narratives and to become comfortable and with who they are, and among other things, but it's also giving them agency to change how all the rest of us think about them and the communities they identify with. So I wondered if both of you, both in Berlin and in London, and if you could give us some examples of how the kids themselves are changing us. And maybe we'll go to you, Severine, for this. How are the kids in your theater workshops changing you and me and the people in the audience?
So if I may first, I would say one of the main aims of the Theater X is to tackle prejudice on marginalized groups through political education of mostly these stigmatized groups. And one day I had a discussion with a drama teacher, and he told me that in many plays he went to see through Germany, he noticed that refugees or migrants mostly are given simple rules. They do not talk much because they maybe don't know the language so much, or they just tell their own story. Oh, I am a refugee, etc. And the theater gave them the tool to be able to talk about very complex issues, political issues, even in German. So when we saw them on stage like that, I mean, and this was the feedback from the audience, we were very all impressed. Wow, first of all, young people, and also young people who maybe don't speak the language, but also young people who speak the language, what can they say? Wow, this is this analytical mind, this critical mind so far, and this was a very impressive thing. And I think this tackle really the prejudice that some people in the audience, or maybe even me, but I knew this theater, so I knew that they were doing that, that they could achieve that. It changed us because we maybe have prejudice on young people, and when we see, wow, how they can really be very clever, talk about these very complicated issues, this is impressive. And I will give 2 examples of scenes there was also in the play, which were also changing the audience, 2 strong, powerful scenes that really had an impact on the audience. And one was the German couple. There was a German couple played by 2 young people who asked, "You, refugee? You are a refugee?" And there was a young boy replying, "What do you want to know when you ask?" What? I'm Hamoudi, 21 years old, newcomer, a student of freedom studies. Is that enough? And so just through small things like that, it makes us question our terminology, not refugee but newcomers. It makes us question maybe how we label the people. We label them as refugee, but we should see them as individual. It's just a young person. And so I think on that, this is the feedback we had from the audience. And also another scene which was for me like the most powerful was, especially because I was pregnant at that time maybe, and so it was, "Where are you really from?" Where I'm really from? It was such a warm place. I felt so safe. There was a lot of water there, but not fishes. And that smell, it smells so wonderful. Honestly, I believe everyone comes from there. And this continues with, have you ever heard about the concept of uterus? So they use humor in this sense to show us that this question, where are you really from? This is maybe a usual question that people will ask when they meet someone with migration background or a POC, like, yeah, but where are you really from? And so that has racist implication. And to tell us, yeah, we come all from the same place. In this case, with humor from the uterus. But I think this was the impact it has on people, on changing our view.
Yeah. See me who as I am and how I am just like you. That's wonderful. That's great. So we have a lot of questions have now started coming in. I want to thank Séverine, Emily, Amina for sharing all of your expertise and insights. But let's move quickly now to our questions from the audience. We have a couple of questions about how you recruited participants in your programs. Sylvia Carrasco wants to know, how were participants recruited and did teachers get involved? And then there's a follow-up question on that from Shannon Damery about media. But let's start with recruitment. How did you recruit students, Séverine, for your project?
So this happened in the 7 countries of the project. So in the 7 cities of the European project. So first of all, we all had to take contacts with organizations like cultural centers, NGOs, social workers, refugee centers, refugee facilities, or associations that are in direct contact with refugees. So with schools. And in Berlin, for example, we had contact with some teachers in school in the neighborhood of the theater. So, and also with some teachers from the welcome classes, because in Germany, they are, for the refugees that came, they are like integration courses, what they call integration courses, where they learn the language. This is for older people, but there are also welcome classes where the younger people under 18 goes. At the beginning where they learn the language, and these welcome classes are in normal schools. So we had contacts with teachers. And what we did is that 3 months prior of the workshop, the theater, together with us, we organized some workshops where we invited the young people to come and to test. just to have a first test of the theater, to see like if they like that, even to make some icebreaker, some games, to get to know the team. And as I told before, without asking them their status. So we will not say, are you a refugee, so you fit to the project, or no, just everyone was welcome. This is very important, I feel. And then the one who were interested could continue to come.
Perfect.
So we didn't.
Yeah.
This is how we did.
So you that good. And what did you do in London, Emily? And I mean, how did you recruit students, or were you recruiting schools?
Yes, so in terms of recruiting students through schools, what we do is before we go and work in a school, we meet with as I said before, we meet with the sort of senior leadership and with teachers who are interested in the project. And we talk, once we have a kind of teacher on board who wants to be the key teacher who's going to come to because we like the teachers to actually come to the workshops as well, because they learn a lot from it. It's also about their sort of learning experience. And so we ask the teachers to identify pupils that they think would benefit from it. And, typically the idea is to also access kind of hard to engage students. But I would say that, it's also good to have some kind of keen ones involved as well, to have a good mix in the group. And as Amina said before, it's for both Muslim and non-Muslim girls, because we think, the issues are relevant to everyone. But again, it's very much in the context of each school and working with that school to work out what the best approach would be there in terms of how to pick the students. So we try to be as flexible as possible. And I'd just like to add to the one of the questions before, which was we didn't touch upon from the Mazhar perspective, but about empowering girls and giving them agency. I think that we're really at Mazhar, with Muslim Girls Fence, we very much emphasise that we're not empowering these girls or giving them agency, in the sense that this is about these girls sort of telling their own stories on their own terms, and we are creating a space in which they create narratives for themselves and challenge stereotypes. But that's the way that we kind of approach it and look at it, and I think that's really fundamental to the project, which again sort of ties in, if you like, with this question of pupil recruitment, because it's just about like which pupils are we going to kind of benefit from being in this space and having this opportunity. But once they're in there, that space, obviously it's really, really led by them, and they have like so much, these are girls, obviously teenage girls have a huge amount of character and a huge amount to say, and then I think we've learned a lot from them. You learn a lot from being part of those workshops with them.
Very good. Now, the second half of the question from Shannon, beyond the recruitment, she asks, with all the media attention and hopes of replication, was there any danger of exploiting these young people or making them feel like poster children for these types of projects? How did you deal with that, or was that a problem in your work? And maybe, Amina, we can continue with you, or Emily. Were you challenged on that topic of whether you were exploiting these children in any way to address the broader goals of the?
No, so it's a really interesting question, but actually, and that's something that I didn't have time to kind of elaborate much on in the presentation. But what we do is so we go into schools and we work with girls across this 10-week program, and then, like I said, we continue the relationship with the schools, and girls can be they carry on basically being part of Muslim Girls Fence, and they become ambassadors for the project, and that involves, if they want to, that involves kind of being speaking to the media and other kind of like public engagement or advocacy opportunities. They have an opportunity, there's a blog space on our website where they can write about the issues that concern them and are affecting them, particularly from the perspective as young Muslim women, and if there are things in the media that they want to respond to. We also connect them to kind of work experience opportunities. Again, as I said before, because it's very much about these girls having a platform to use their voices and tell their own stories, that the work experience opportunities that we do are very much tied to that. And they can also get involved with helping us set up the next, working with younger cohorts within their school, doing Muslim Girls Fence again. So there's a real legacy that we leave for these girls. And so there's no question of it being exploitative, because it's a project that really is led by them. Obviously, we're teaching them the fencing, but the creative stuff and the voices and the stories is led by them. And I'd really encourage people, as I said before, to just have a look at our latest film. It'd be great if we could just put, if there was a link that we could put,
we'll share it, absolutely.
Have a look at that, because that's a brilliant space to see these girls talking about their identity, the issues that matter to them, and that's just them in their own words, and I think they can say it better than either Aman and I can.
That's right. No, that's we will do that, and I'm sure that's true. Severine, I'd like to ask you. I mean, your kids are on stage, on theater. They're embracing a very public-facing persona. But a good question: Did you have to deal with any negative feedback from the community or in media?
This is a very good question, and we ask ourselves this question too at the beginning of the project. How do we deal with the media? How do we avoid that they become poster children in a way? And as Emily and Amina said, as the children, they took complete ownership of the project. It was led by them. They were mostly proud of sharing their experience of what they have achieved, and also they used it actually to share on stage or to share in the media their message on the danger of right-wing ideology. So they became a bit political in a way. When they had the opportunity to speak in front of the media, yes, they used it to exchange what they learned, what they think about the political situation. So we didn't have a bad experience in that.
Yeah,
and we asked them directly, who wants to speak?
Yeah.
We asked them directly, this is the best, I think, who would be interested in speaking with the media? And then the one who want to, so the one who don't want, then we know they don't want to be on video, and we try to avoid it.
Very good. Okay, so we're going to let ourselves run over time a little bit because we have some really interesting questions. The next question comes from Matt Martin, and it addresses the issue of the families of these young people. This is a great question. He says, what advice would you give to youth who are trying to balance the expectations of their family and their own identity, goals, aspirations as young people? Perhaps again, let's go to Maslaha on the participation of family or any feedback around that topic. It's hard for young people to sometimes be themselves with the expectations that parents put on them.
Hi there. Yeah. So in terms of these projects, because we always get there's always parental consent for the girls to be involved in the project, and to be honest, we've just had kind of incredibly positive feedback and relationships with the families, and parents have been really supportive, and again, of the girls involved with our ambassador work. We know their parents, and it's the same thing there. I think they see it as a really great opportunity for the kids. So we haven't. That's not in terms of having to sort of give any advice in terms of expectations and their own identity goals. We haven't come across sort of any conflict there between the sort of the kind of Maslahah goals and the goals of the family. It's been, really positive.
Okay. So just to continue on that for a moment then, Emily, I've got a question here from Erica, who thanks everyone for the presentations, but she wants to know how you framed the conversations within the workshops on identity. She asks, were the workshops discussion-based? How did you approach the topic of identity with your young people?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to actually, I feel like I'd like to pass that over to Amina, because she'll be better equipped to answer it, because she is, she delivers some of these workshops. So I'll pass it over.
Great. Amina.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for the question. A really good question. I mean, I think what's important to think about when answering this question is that, so all the workshops we do is over a period of 10 weeks, so it's 10 workshops, and they're actually all building on each other. And they're often structured in a way where we're always referring back to what we've previously discussed, and then we sort of explore a new topic. So there's all the issues around stereotyping, media representations, identity, belonging, intersectionality, as well as challenging all of these issues as well. And so when identity sort of comes in, it is, I mean, like with all of our workshops, not necessarily specific to this one, but it's always often starts off as a discussion, getting these girls to talk about their own identities, their own experiences, as well as coupling it with creative work around whether it's through art and drawing or through writing, where they can express themselves and express different elements of who they are or how people might perceive them, as well as how they might want to be perceived. And, you know, and there's other things around photography, which we do. We use a method called photo voice, which is a social science method where people are encouraged, participants are encouraged to go out and take photographs, and it's an alternative way in which to express marginalized or ostracized voices. Lots of the time we found it works really well with this project. And so then again, it's another creative way in which they can express who they are, which might not necessarily come out in words, you know. They don't necessarily come out with sort of broad categories of, oh, I consider myself Muslim or female or a daughter or whatever, but through exploring these issues through both discussion and creative work, you often find that we get a much more complex picture of all the different elements of how they see themselves and their experiences. And of course, also I mentioned when I was talking, when we were doing the presentation, intersectionality is an important theme which we explored, and how all of these elements and parts of their identity intersect and overlap into shaping their experiences. And we sort of explore that both on a theoretical level. Obviously, the extent to which we do that really depends on the age group that we're working with, but as well as on a more practical level when they talk about their experiences and what are the different elements of their identity that sort of shaped that particular experience.
Oh, very good. And I'm going to turn this to Séverine too, because I know that it's so pertinent to her work. The question was, you know, were the workshops discussion-based, and how did you approach the topic of identity with youth? And I'd like to segue from that question to a question asked by Rosa Ariv, who is curious about what play was performed. And because I know that the question about the discussions really answer that question. So, Séverine, perhaps can you comment on how the workshops were they discussion-based, and how they approached the topic of identity?
They were definitely discussion-based, and this was, I talked about it during the presentation. It was during the dramaturgy workshop. During 2 hours every second Saturday, the young people were really taking this time to discuss on identity and migration, etc. And for example, they use some techniques, some methodology, some games, telling to the people, create a persona and discuss on this persona. So what is a typical German person? What is a typical refugee? What is a typical migrant? And so they were asking a small group of young people, were separated in small groups, and they had to discuss what are the skills. And then they were discussing about the persona they developed, and to try to think, is that a prejudice? To talk about prejudice on people, their own prejudice that they could have had, for example, themselves. And there was also other games like asking them a question and asking them to go on a line from the left to the right. I agree, I disagree, I feel I am that, I feel I am not. So this was the ways they were trying to develop the identity, to ask the people how they feel, what kind of identity, and what do they think about German, about refugee, about migrant, depending on who they were. And then they were discussing. And then the other part of the question, what play did you choose, and how was it chosen? So,
yes, I thought this was a great question to ask, because I think your participatory methods actually really went right to the writing and creation of the play itself. Did they not? Yeah.
So they created a play that they named "What the Folk," and this is a bit complicated to explain the word "folk." Folk is in German mean people, but it's used also over the German parliament, but it has been misused lately, and it's not a very inclusive word. So it's the more inclusive word is Bevölkerung, which means so the word folk is very linked to nation, and so in the play they were playing with these words, and through that going through they wrote the text themselves. So it means that it was they got inspired maybe by Brecht and other writers, but mostly they wrote about after telling about their own experience. So for example, one part was about exactly what I was saying before, playing like what could be typical German, what could be typical refugee, and tackling the prejudices on both, how people see that and say that. The other play was being in the world of the sharks, and they were all with a very beautiful costume of fishes, and playing and using the animals to play what humans are, and how they also exclude, or they talk about nation. It was a shark nation, so this was another part, and the last part they were with books, and it was about the language, and the last part of the play was mostly tackling the problem of the use of the language, and as I said, the word folk has been more and more used, or like one minister used also some words to talk about refugees which were not appropriate, and so they were in this play. At the end they were throwing the words and saying, let's use new words, let's use more inclusive words. I hope it answers the question.
It's really quite extraordinary. Well, I do hope that that the play will find its way onto new stages, because there are many audiences that would, I think, enjoy that incredible performance. Now, we're at the end of our hour, so I have just two questions that we're going to close with. The next one from Donald, he notes that you've all received funding from foundations and companies and wants to know whether that was a difficult part of the process, getting the funding. So just a quick answer from both projects. Séverine, would you like to comment on how the project was funded and ongoing funding for the project?
So the project was funded by the European Commission, by the DG Justice and Home Affairs, I think, and Migrations. And actually we got a lot of money because it was a period of time where the European Commission wanted, a lot of refugees came to Europe at that moment, and they wanted to finance this kind of project. So it was kind of very amazing, not for the local, but because we are 7 cities and we have to see, but it was 700,000 or something, like for the whole cities, with all the coordination, with all the things, but it's a lot of money. And this was not difficult, but then, as I mentioned earlier, it brings that it makes that we are not so free to do everything we want, because the European Commission has a very clear request, and sometimes, for example, about the asylum status of refugees, it was very difficult to do, how to deal with it, to please the Commission request, and at the same time to do it the project as we want. We did it as mostly as we wanted and as we wanted to design it, but this can be a problem sometimes.
Yeah. And how about you, Emily and Amina, on the funding?
Yeah, so I think that, as I said, this project is currently funded by Comic Relief and by Google.org, and obviously all funding, process, there's a process to doing funding applications that everyone knows, and, it's quite arduous, but I think that essentially this project is really relevant. It's incredibly relevant in the UK, and I think, across, internationally as well, and so it's actually been, relatively easy to get funding for something like this, because it's a really current and important topic, and actually also interestingly linking back to the stuff that I've been saying about the sort of unusualness of it, if you like, that it's because it's very eye-catching. People are just automatically really interested in it, and they want to know more. And so our pilot project was really successful, and I think that off the back of that and those successes, it's been easy to demonstrate, just the real depth of impact that a project like this can have.
That's great. That's fantastic. So for our closing question from Matt Martin, he asks, for youth who are struggling to emotionally connect to their local community, newcomer youth, after resettlement, what types of program do you recommend? We just have time for a very short answer, so I guess if you had a word of advice for a young newcomer, what would that be? And again, to you, Séverine, what advice do you have for a newcomer struggling to connect?
This is a very good question because I know that from a lot of my friends who are teachers in schools where they are in these integration courses I talked about, and most of the young people are looking for, most of the young newcomers are looking for opportunities. So what kind of advice I could give them? Try to find an association, like for example in Berlin there is this Give Something Back to Berlin. This is an organization that proposes a lot of activities to connect between locals and newcomers. So try to find an association in your city that will give you this information, and just go and get to know the people there. I hope it was the question, because
yes. No, I think that's a great answer. That's a great answer. How about you, Emily and Amina? Advice for a young newcomer?
Yeah, no, that is a great question, and I think that I wouldn't want to give a sort of prescriptive answer to that, but I think in our experience, if there's any difficulty for a newcomer or for many with our project, it's not necessarily newcomers, but if there's any issues around struggling to emotionally connect, we found that and I think this taps into the other project as well, but the use of creativity and the art to build these connections, and the act of creating and of making and of exploring, in this, for us, exploring these issues around identity, but using creativity in a very personal way to do that is a great way to kind of begin to reach those people and to start being able to kind of have a deeper conversation with them about what's going on. And I think that is, it's not necessarily I can't really give advice about what we would say to an individual, because again it's so context based, but yeah, I think that using creativity to kind of unlock some of these conversations and create a space where that's possible would be my very broad advice. I hope that's kind of helpful.
Yeah. That's great. No, that's excellent. The arts and the public imagination, getting involved and making connections. These are, we've had a fantastic session. I'd like to thank all of you. Unfortunately, we really do have to close. There are a few more questions we may try to deal with, issues of maternal language, how young people feel about such things in another session. That's one of the great things about these conversations, is all the new ideas that they bring to us. But for now, I'd like to thank Séverine, Emily, and Amina for sharing your expertise and insights with us. We've really enjoyed the learning today. So we've now concluded the formal portion of today's webinar. And there's just time. I'd like to have the last word, and at the end of the Q&A, I'd like to get the last word. So before we close, I'd like to ask the presenters, if you had one word that could represent that was the secret to your success, what would that be? And let's go to you. Well, actually, we'll get one from each of you. We'll go to Emily. If you had one word to express the secret of your success, what would it be?
I think flexibility would be the word, and in flexibility I'm really referring to that thing about really recognizing the kind of heterogeneous nature of the groups that you're working with, and the local context being so important, whether that's local in terms of a school culture or a local culture in a different city or whatever it is, and then I think actually for our project, and we're very aware of this, that not just thinking that you're working with the Muslim community, because there are many communities within communities, and that doesn't exist actually. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, excellent. And how about you, Emily? One word, or Amina? Sorry.
Oh, so Amina's typing on our on our chat at the moment. But she's just mouthed to me creativity, so that would be her word.
Creativity is perfect. So we've got flexibility, creativity, and Séverine, what is your one word secret to your success?
I would say creativity and flexibility too, but I think I would say co-creation, co-design.
Perfect.
To use a participative approach to co-design and co-create together.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. So flexibility, creativity, co-creation, and look at the extraordinary work that those ideas are creating. I want to thank you very much. Our time has run out. I'd like to thank Séverine, Emily, and Amina for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. Thank you. We'll send any unanswered questions to, you're welcome. On behalf of all of our participants, the Cities of Migration team at Ryerson, I thank Séverine Langlais, Emily Mason, and Amina Amer for a brilliant exchange of ideas. And to our audiences in Cities of Migration everywhere, I'd like you to imagine this excellent work being interpreted in your city, adapted by your organization, or changing your neighborhood. And we'd like to hear your stories and share more good practices, so stay connected.